Thank you very much for coming and welcome to our NG Europe, post-NG Europe special. Very happy to see you all. I'm sorry about all the ruckus this week, but normal service will commence next month at the Walker offices with Ed. So watch the meetup group for the next event. So without further ado, I hand you over to Roddy, who's going to speak to you a bit about what happened at NG Europe. And then we're going to do a Q&A with the few members of the team that made it over the channel. Thank you.
Hello? Can everybody hear me? Oh, yeah. Hello? Now? Can everybody hear me now? Yes. Okay. So NG Europe happened last week in Paris, and so this is a post-NG Europe meetup. So we think it's a good way to start by doing a summary of the conference. And oh, by the way, my name is Roddy, and I'm a member of the core team, the Angular core team. And so a good way to lay out this presentation would be by starting the current status of the project and the new information we got from NG Europe relating to Angular 1.x. Then talk about the new features that we intend to implement in 2.x, and top it off with what happened in the community related to NG Europe. And so obviously any Angular presentation needs to start with a unicorn, because that's the Angular mascot. Sorry. Okay, so Angular 1.x, actually version 1.3 got released exactly 2 weeks ago. And so this is a version that's 8 months in the making. The total is 26 versions of betas and previous candidates. And mainly what something we focused on is performance. So for example, the parser now understands your expressions to make query checking a lot faster. We also have things like one-time binding. I don't know if you know what it is, but it allows you to remove watchers for things that you know are stable. And so that was something the community really wanted, and now it's in the core framework. We also have better forms. Well, we saw how the community wanted to use forms in Angular, and we implemented in the core. And this is all, you will be able to go watch the video, which was presented by Jeff and Brian, and it will cover everything about 1.3. We also had this new module called NG Area, which allows you to have accessibility in your Angular app, so it could work on screen reader as well. So if your clients want accessibility, you can have it, and if they don't want it, you should make them want it. So we also still have the version 1.2, the 1.2 branch. And the difference mainly is that it still supports IE8. So if your clients want IE8, you can use that. so again, this is in Jeff and Brian's talk, but these are mainly the pinpoint stuff and 1.x. There was a big presentation on 2.x, and really the conclusion from it is that we're going declarative all the way. We want everything to be declarative. So just to give you a quick code example with some HTML. So in version 1.3, you would be using stuff like ng model, ng check, or ng click. Well, in 2.0, we want it to be a lot more declarative. So we'll be starting to use brackets for notation, for binding, sorry. So using brackets around attribute to mark them as binding. And this is great because then you don't have to create all these bridges, right? And it works automatically with web components. So we're trying to align with web components and add on top of them. Also for event listeners, instead of brackets, we're starting to use parentheses. And we want to use parentheses. And again, if a web component fires off some DOM event, you don't have to do anything special. You just put that DOM event inside of there, and it just works. And so that more declarative IDEs can work and support it better because they know what is the directive in the code. Yeah, that's pretty much it. So we went declarative in the HTML. We want to also go more declarative in the programming language. And so you might have heard of this new thing called AScript, and you might have heard heard that it's a new language, but it's not. It's really not a new language. And if you want Mishko's talk on exactly that subject, it's mainly ECMAScript 6 with annotations, introspection, and optional types that we want to add to it. It's built on top of Tracer, so if you're already planning on using it, it's just a couple more options, and you have it. And again, the goal is to have more declarative code. And to be clear, you don't need AdScript to write 2.x applications. It's just that it makes your code a lot more declarative. And I'll show a code example just after, in a minute. But there's also other changes in 2.x that we want to make. And again, they're covered in Igor and Tobias' talk, but I just want to make a quick summary before the Q&A. For example, Angular.modules, we kind of scratched that, and we want to use ECMAScript 6 modules. Also, JQLite, since we no longer want to support IE8 in the next versions, we're just going to use DOM, remove that wrapper, and make it a lot more performant. But if you want to use jQuery in your application, you can just wrap it as you're used to. There's also things like scopes and controllers, which beforehand, scopes, for example, had too many responsibilities, and controllers were a bit vague. So we changed it to components, again, to align ourselves with web components. And directives, for example, beforehand it had this crazy API with so many properties in their definition. We found that while looking, this was an API that was built 5 years ago, and in 2009 when Angular started. And we found that we can split it up to stuff like component directives, template directives, and decorator directives, and make the code again more declarative for the developer. So just to show you what I mean, and to demo AdScript a bit. Beforehand, if you wanted to implement a link directive and it wanted the timeout service, it would look a little something like this. But what we want it to be like is more like an ECMAScript 6 class with annotations for directive, a constructor using optional types for dependency injection. So we feel this is a lot more declarative, and we want to. This is, I don't know if you compared it to, I pursue like the other one a lot better. But so 1.3, well, we had to talk about it. 2.0, we had to talk about it. So we had AdScript, but the conference was about a lot more. So the community did give many talks, most of the talks. So you might expect things like talks about the Ionic framework, which is a mobile framework, which is a framework built on top of Angular for mobile development. And it's really great. This guy named Andrew did a demo, built an app in like 20 minutes. It was pretty amazing. And we also had a talk about Famous, which is an animation framework, and Zach, he did the bridge between Famous and Angular, also gave a talk. And so if you're interested in like native animations in a way, you can look at that. We also had a talk by Brian about tooling. So Angular Hint, mainly he talked about Angular Hint, which is a collection of projects built by the team, which gives you hints about your code. So if you're doing bad stuff in your code, you doesn't know. There was also a talk about the new router. You probably caught wind of that. We designed a new router for 2.x. We have the design docs online, and we now also have a presentation that explains it from Engineer. And we also plan to backport it to 1.3, so that's in progress. And you can expect to find a new router, more advanced than the router, that will be supported by the team. On my phone. We also had some other interesting thoughts, like from Virgin America, whose website is built with Angular, and they talked about how with the framework they were able to get out very fast iterations, build stuff fast, and show them to the client and get what they desired. There was another talk that I personally liked about Angular Dart under the hood, and it showed just the internals of Angular Dart. And Angular Dart was kind of our testing ground for Angular 2.0, which will be written in AdScript, which is ECMAScript 6. And so all the concept that you would see in that talk would be present in Angular 2. We also had this great talk about animations sequencer by Matthias, and yeah, so the animation with sequencers, so to make very complicated animations with Angular sequencing, and they mainly use it for material design, which is, you probably heard of it from Google. They like standard on design, which is now being implemented in Angular, and it's also in Android Lollipop. And finally, another type that I liked about AngularJS accessibility. So I mentioned NGArea above, but there was if you want to learn more about it, you can watch the talk about AngularJS accessibility. And that was like 10 minute summary, I believe. So thank you for listening, and that's pretty much it.